Okay, we're going to start. Do you call to order now or wait?
We can call to order now.
Okay.
We'll take roll call for who's here. We're not yet at a quorum, but we're expecting one more to reach there. So we'll start with some of the non-voting items. So with roll call, Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Committee Member McMillan.
Here.
Councilmember Wynn.
Here.
Chair Rikus.
Here.
Okay, so again, at 4, expecting one more to vote on items.
And since we can't approve without a quorum, we're going to, is there any public comment, first of all?
This is John Kennedy. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Kennedy.
Hello. Good. Bobby Burns called me, and I'd love to come to your meeting, but not that I want to go to another meeting. But I have a good friend from out of town I'm having dinner with. But he asked me if I could speak a little bit to zero-based budgeting, because I spent a good deal amount of time after I got out of grad school, MBA, implementing zero-based budgeting systems. So I put a little presentation together, which I could run through right now if you'd like.
Sure.
I'm not familiar with Google Zoomy. How do I show my screen?
Yeah, down at the center portion there should be a number of icons. In the middle, there should be a square with an up arrow, and that should allow you to share screen.
Okay.
And then you'll probably have to pop-up window and click a screen and then share.
Okay. Pop-up window, pick a screen.
See if you can do it.
Do you see that?
No.
It is not yet coming through on our end.
Okay. You must grant permission in order to screen share.
Give me 1 second. Okay, you try again.
Okay. And it still says I can't share my screen.
There we go. Something's coming through. I'm seeing a very small snippet, not an entire screen. Do you want?
Okay.
Not all the way. Oh, do you want to? Either you could try emailing it to me, or do you want to just march on through without?
Well, you just try one more thing here.
Okay.
All right, so do you see that?
No, still nothing coming through on our end. Oh, here we go. There we go.
Here it comes.
All right, so now we're seeing.
Coming now.
Yeah, we're seeing your browser now, so now you should switch. All right, great.
Cool. So you see the zero-based budget. Basics is zero-base.
Correct.
Okay, good. So what's the objective of zero-based budgeting? First off, the key thing is you're aligning resources with deliverables. In other words, a quality control department at a pharmaceutical company. What is it that you do, and what kind of resources does it take to make sure people aren't killed with the pills we produce? So in addition to that, there's a prioritization on how do you get things done. Not only what is happening now, but also nice to have. So you start with what's the minimal amount you got to get done, go through what are you doing now, and then icing on the cake, what would you like to do if you had unlimited resources? The interesting thing about it is that it focuses each department into its core mission. And it becomes clear not only to staff, but also to management and so on. You're not necessarily looking for savings, but you're just trying to get what's important to get done aligned with the limited resources we have. Now, in a full-blown ZBB thing, what you do is you kind of create all these blocks, and it'll become clear as I go on. And then you'll have these nice to haves. And in theory, you can move around some of the blocks at the top end. In other words, you want to move resources, but we're not going to get into that. So what I would recommend, if you're at all interested in implementing zero-based, is start with one department. This takes a lot of time. It's usually done with consultants that are coming in, but I'd be more than willing to work with whomever, even if I don't get elected, I'd be willing to help. Basically staff are asked questions that they've never been asked about. How many, how often, what happens then? It can be very threatening. How few troops can you get by with? I had a department at a pharmaceutical company that basically fought me tooth and nail because they knew I was going to uncover their kingdom that they built up. People wouldn't show up to meetings, materials weren't distributed. It was a pain in the ass. Anyway, there's a lot of moving parts, but you basically, most departments have lots of things going on, but you boil it down to 3 or 4 key priorities. Now, the benefits to staff after they get over the threatening period, which was usually at the beginning, they actually see a lot clearer what's important. And as they go forward, they can make better decisions. By the way, anybody have any questions, please stop me. So
I have a question.
Yeah.
What kind of consultants do this work? Is it accountants or? Well,
it's probably nobody you want paid because they probably go for many thousands of dollars a day. I was with a consulting company and, as a starter one-on-one kid, I was thrown into this thing all by myself. But, I don't know. I haven't kept up with this at all, so I have no idea who's doing it now. But I think we could probably get by without diving too deep into external resources. At least the first blush to see what happens.
Thank you.
Anything else? So, so we break the department down, basically the current functions into 4 to 6 levels of services and or deliverables. And then once you get the basics, what are we doing now broken into, what is it that we're delivering to the residents of Evanston and what does it cost? And you kind of come up to your current budget level. The fun part begins with, all right, what would you like to do? And that's a positive thing because departments all have these dreams and, they get into it. You are basically aligning and defining the resources to accomplish each level of services. Now, what do I mean by that? What does it cost to do X? Okay. So at the very base level, this was the scary part. You would walk in and basically say, what are the fewest troops you need to get your basics done? And what are those basics? And if we were to take the Public Works Department, for example, what's the basic thing, the minimal thing that you would do and still call yourself the Public Works Department? Well, we'd have to provide minimal maintenance of our current infrastructure, with safety being the main focus and criteria for doing anything. In other words, if people are going to get hurt, we got to go fix it. But otherwise, we're not going to do much maintenance. Now, that's probably too basic, but you get the gist. You basically say, what's the minimal amount and still call yourself, for example, a Public Works Department. Nothing new, nothing nice to have. nothing, and it wouldn't be necessarily everything you're doing today. And you continue to add those blocks of services and deliverables and their costs for each successive level that you're doing. So for example, at a certain level, you might say, well, what is it you'd like to do next? Well, we'd like to pick up the garbage on, more often. Okay. Well, what does it take to do that? Or we'd like to pick up the garbage more often than once a month. We all know that would be unrealistic, but let's just say that that was a base criteria. Okay. If you wanted to do it more often, what does it take? Well, an additional 3 trucks and 8 staff people. You basically break it down into very, very quantified things, not necessarily dollars, but staff and time and, capital kinds of issues like trucks and that type of thing. So you align the deliverables with the resources required to get those done. And then, as I said earlier, the fun part begins when you talk about what could be done in addition to what
Mr.
you're
Kennedy?
doing now. Yeah.
Can you wrap up in a couple minutes? This is really interesting, but we have a lot on our agenda. But thank you. This is really interesting.
I'm done. The end result from a picture point of view is basically you've got, in this case, 4 levels of what we're doing now, and then you have the nice to have. Okay? So that's all I got.
All right, thank you. And I like the suggestion, one department, that way we can digest it and see how that goes. So,
Absolutely.
okay, thank you very much. And
All right.
we're going to discuss it later.
Bye-bye.
The rest is on our agenda to discuss it later. So,
All right.
okay,
See you
thank
later.
you.
All right, you dropped off. Noting that Councilmember Burns is here added to the roll, we are at a quorum and can vote on action items.
Great. Can I get an approval for the January 14th, 2025 Finance and Budget Committee meeting minutes? Do I have a motion?
Sorry, 1 second.
Okay, 1 second.
Kelly. Okay. I'll take roll. Councilmember Kelly. Yes. Committee Member McMillan. Yes. Councilmember Wynn. Aye. Chair Rikus.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Approved 5-0.
Great. And we're going to talk about now the 2024 post-bond issuance report.
Good evening, Chair, the members of the Finance Budget Committee. This is just a procedural thing. In 2012, the City Council adopted kind of a more so voluntarily that, okay, we will make sure that whenever we issue the bonds, we will have this kind of a report from Treasurer to the City Council. And what it just says that to keep our tax exempt status, because whenever we issue the bonds, GO bonds, for our CIP project, they are tax exempt. And whether we are making the right use of that money, spending right way, investing right place, if there is any rebate or any what they call arbitrage rebate where we earn more, there is a formula how to calculate. Did we have that calculation done by a consultant? And if there is an arbitrage rebate, have we submitted it to the IRS? We have to return that money back to that. So these are the kind of requirements. So it's just a procedural thing. So I thought, okay, let me just bring it up here, and then it would go to the City Council to place it on a file.
Any questions?
Yeah, motion. So it would be a motion to recommend a council to review and place on file.
Okay, we'd like to recommend that staff recommends the Finance and Budget Committee that will recommend to the City Council to review and place the 2024 post-bond issuance report on file. Is there a motion? So moved. Is there a second? I'll second. Okay.
To take roll call, Councilmember Kelly. Committee Member McMillan. Councilmember Wynn. Chair Rikus.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Approved 5-0.
Okay, thank you.
And then noting that Councilmember Nusma has joined us, so we are up to 6 voting members.
Okay, now FB2, 20-R-25, expressing the official intent regarding the expenditures from the funds of the city of Evanston, Cook County, Illinois, to be reimbursed from the proceeds of obligations to be issued by the city of Evanston, Cook County, Illinois. Did you want to talk about that a little bit, Hitesh, or is it's another?
And again, I'll just go through the purpose, and then, if you have questions specifically about the projects, Lara can answer those. So this is the thing I think we have talked about. Reimbursement resolution provides you an ability to recover the money which are supposed to be funded out of the bonds. And obviously, we issue the bonds later in the year, depending on the interest rate environment, late spring, late summer, But the bond work, which are part of the 25 budget approved by the city council, obviously the Public Works and other department, they work on it. They use some of the money out of the existing fund balance if available. And then later on, we get it reimbursed. So this reimbursement resolution gives us the ability, whenever we issue the bonds later on, to reimburse the city and put it back in our fund balance. And this reimbursement resolution gives you to go back 60 days. So something happens, say on January 2nd even, we can reimburse that expenses too and get it out of the 25 bond issue whenever we issue the bond. So this is the procedure. That's the thing. Now we have listed the whole details, which bonds, how much money, and all that kind of things. The details are there. Any question about the process? Okay, go ahead.
There is one item I wanted to flag. This mostly represents the adopted budget, that the CIP that was in the adopted budget. We did have an issue come up with change orders at the Ecology Center. That money was not budgeted in this year's budget. And so we added the Ecology Center as a line item into this, and then we reduced another project by the associated amount so that the total GO bond issue remains the same in the GO bond resolution.
Yeah, I was just going to.
Oh, we reduced the consulting services for the service center master plan, or the service center electrical renovation. I have to look at the exact title. Excuse me. You know the project, service center electrical HVAC improvements consulting. We reduced that by approximately $126,000. The change order for the Ecology Center was a little bit more, but we had some money left over in the project budget. But the 126 is exceeding what we had in the project budget. Oh, no, it's definitely needed. It's a huge project that we're going to start in compliance with the Service Center Master Plan. But the timing of the consulting is such that we were spreading the cost over multiple years. And so we were already making an estimate about what is going to happen in this year versus next year. We are down a position in the architecture group. We are hiring somebody and bringing them on, which will be great, but they're not starting until mid-March. So that project is likely to be delayed in conjunction with the fact that the Ecology Center is extended way beyond what we thought it was going to take to get done.
Any other questions? Thank you. Yes, so we need a motion that the Finance and Budget Committee recommends to the City Council the adoption of Resolution 20-R-25, expressing official intent regarding expenditures from the funds of the City of Evanston, Cook County, Illinois, to be reimbursed from the proceeds of obligations to be issued by the city of Evanston, Cook County, Illinois.
Second.
Okay, comment?
So, I mean, for myself, but also for the public. So we're reimbursing, so which funds will be reimbursed? Just so oh, this is it right up here? Okay.
So all of the projects that were approved as part of the 2025 adopted budget that were going to include bond funding are listed in this GEO bond resolution. So any project that is in that list, legally, we can enter into a contract using GEO bond funds, although we have not sold that debt. When we sell the debt, we will then reimburse ourselves from the debt proceeds.
Okay, so in other words, we're going to spend and then we're going to get the money. We're going to spend before we have it, just so I understand.
Yes.
So does that mean we're going to be incurring a deficit because we're taking from reserve?
Absolutely. In 2024, we have not yet sold any of the bonds, and we have been spending that money, so we
Right.
are acting as a deficit.
So we're incurring, so when we make expenditures that are unbudgeted, we're just, creating.
These are not
It just seems like I'm just
unbudgeted.
wondering about the practice of, spending before we have the.
These are not unbudgeted. They are 100% included in the budget, except for the change that I added, which was that language. That change order was approved last night, and there was language in that document indicating that it was not budgeted. It was exceeding the project budget, to let the council know what they were doing. These are all budgeted expenses, but there are rules about reimbursing yourself from a GEO bond issue. So if I understand properly, you sell the debt and then you can spend the debt, the proceeds of the debt. However, we try to time our debt issuance similar to how we did not sell the bonds for the 2022 and 2023 projects until 2024 in order to try to obtain our best interest rate we could. We try to time our debt issuance to get the best interest rate. So the bond resolution allows us to move forward with the capital projects and reimburse ourselves later from the debt proceeds when the debt is issued.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I know in some of the past years, for some of the projects, we said to take it from surplus funds. And then there was always, the ongoing debate that staff would reference that money was being spent from bonds not issued. So just for some clarification on that. So the dialogue that we frequently have where I ask that we not reference spending money from a bond that we didn't issue. Is that the reimbursement, much of that the reference to, like, say, there are projects where we said it would be paid for through a 22 bond, which we didn't issue, or a 23 bond? Is that partially what we're reimbursing now?
So we are not reimbursing anything right now. We are giving ourselves permission to reimburse ourselves from a future bond sale. To try to make things a little more straightforward, we are in the budget calling it 2025 project bonds to refer to the bonds related to the 2025 budget, rather than the bonds that were sold in 2025. However, just for clarity, we do need to, within 18 months of spending money, you only get an 18-month grace period, so you would need to sell the bonds within 18 months if you want to reimburse yourself from for the costs that you were paying.
From the point of paying it. So
Yes.
18 months to issue the bonds to reimburse.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And I just think we should all be aware that right now, one of the potential issues that we could be facing is the cancellation of tax exempt bonds, GO bonds, under this administration. So we should really be keeping that in mind as we think about debt, because that will have a huge impact.
Yeah, Hitesh and I and David brought it up. Yeah, we're aware of it, but there's been nothing firmly
No, but we
approved.
should be thinking ahead about this. So
Right.
we haven't yet issued these bonds. We haven't, many of these projects, I guess, have not yet been started, though I think, but my understanding was that we were also reimbursing ourselves for projects where we spent money that was claimed on bonds that we didn't issue. But
And again, yeah, we talked about it, I think, we had this conversation last time during this administration, and obviously nothing happened. And in fact, I think I wrote in the email that there are some groups who are asking to bring back the advance refunding as a tax exempt. It used to be tax exempt, then it became taxable in 2017, I think. And there are some groups, particularly lobbying on behalf of the communities, municipalities, and villages. They want to bring even the advance refunding and make it a tax exempt. So that could be that. And again, to Councilmember Kelly, your question, this is just, as Lara said, ability to reimburse. Something goes in our favor and we are sitting on a fund balance, we will still come to the city council when we are ready to issue the bond. And if we come say, yep, we want to issue 37, you say, no, you have 25 million sitting in the CIP fund balance. And we say, okay, what's the amount? So the city council has the ability to decide the amount of the bond issue. This is just the ability. It's not bond issued, right? Yeah, we cannot issue the bonds based on this approval. There will be a bond ordinance whenever we are ready to issue the bonds.
Okay, any other questions?
Okay, I will take roll call on the motion. Councilmember Kelly. Committee Member McMillan. Councilmember Wynn. Councilmember Nusma. Chair Rikus.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Passed 6-0. Thank you.
Great, and we are watching legislation, and if things look like we have to accelerate the bond issuance, we will, but we've all been kind of talking about it, so it's not going to get by us. So just like we've had these other policies, the expenditure and the pension policy, our group wanted to have a debt management policy, and I've been talking with Clayton and Desh, and correct me if I'm wrong, but no other municipality actually has a debt policy. A lot of them have it within their budget. But we want to have our standalone debt policy. But before we can formalize it, there's a bunch of factors that we want to kind of have a consensus of a group on, certain ratios, certain debt. And so Clayton has spent a lot of time going through this and is going to walk us through questions that we can have a consensus on as a group. And is that right? They don't have debt policies, or they're...
I wouldn't say that. I would say that at least among our comps, we pulled what we could find from them related to a debt management plan or a debt management policy, and we've included that in the attachments. I don't think any of them have like a super robust, massive plan that we've been able to acquire. That's just our comps. We haven't really gone outside of the comparable communities you all identified. I'm sure there's communities out there that have super robust debt management plans. So
Well, you looked at Skokie, right? Yeah.
So we will go through the presentation.
Okay, sure.
So we'll, and to clarify that even further, attached to this item is what we found related to debt policies, debt management plans for these communities. And so I know Skokie was just mentioned, if there's more to their debt management plan than what they include in their budget, which is really just a few paragraphs related to debt, certainly send it our way and we'll include it as well, and consider it in the plan. So last month we came and we gave you a bunch of data, kind of what our comps debt was related to GO outstanding principal amounts. This month we took a look at our comps and the debt management plans and debt limits and bond ratings for our comparable communities to see how we stack up, and put together sort of a framework for a debt management plan. And so I'll walk through this presentation. It sort of pulls data from the memo itself, so there's nothing in this presentation. It is in the packet beyond what's in the memo. But we've sort of taken a look at debt management plans and think there's 5 key components to one. One is an understanding of your current outstanding debt, all-inclusive, if you wanted to cover outstanding GO.
This is page 29 of our packets.
So if you wanted to include tax-supported debt, enterprise debt, loans, pension liabilities, really up to you as to what you want to be included in this debt management plan. I know we already have a separate pension policy that kind of covers pensions, and I think the purpose of this debt management plan is to focus on the other part of our debt that we haven't yet developed a policy to speak to. A second part would be benchmarks with our peer communities. You can see some of the data we pulled and then decide. Third is setting a debt limit. We've talked previously about our current debt limit and what that is. We provided some information here. If you don't think that's the current debt, the appropriate measure, there's other measures we can use. And I'll walk through sort of what other communities do. A good debt management plan should cover how you're going to fund future incremental debt service, whether that's through the property tax levy, new revenues, large one-time revenues, some other source. So we'll walk through that. And then finally, a focus on maintaining current bond ratings. So Evanston's AA bond rating, AA plus, AA through S&P, and AA plus through Fitch. Very high among our peers, honestly, in the upper half of our peers. And so it's important that we continue to maintain or improve that rating someday as well. So I think those are the 5 key components as we looked through our peer communities, the types of things that they talked about within their limited debt management plans. And so I'll walk through each of these a little bit. We talked about this last month, but this is our current total GO bond principal payment amounts for all debt. This is tax supported. Library debt, enterprise debt, and other debt as well. And you can see generally this 10 million in tax-supported debt rolling off each year. Certainly as new debt comes on, this blue amount historically has been around the $10 million mark. This breaks it out, the same data from just a number perspective. But when we talk about the current outstanding debt and the things we want to talk about in a debt management plan, we could use some direction on the type of debt utilized. Right now, we use GO bonds, we use loans, we have a line of credit that may be expired at this point. We never used it. So we should talk in a debt management plan about the types of instruments that we use for debt. We should talk about the methods that we use to repay debt. So we use a tax levy for our tax-supported debt, user fees in our water fund, other revenues. So for many of our IEPA and WIFIA loans, we rely on revenue from some of our wholesale customers to cover a good portion of that debt. So this is another key component for this first part. We should talk a bit about eligible projects. So when do we issue debt? For capital projects, typically with a useful life of 20 years, that certainly doesn't exceed the repayment schedule. That's generally how a lot of communities talk about when they issue debt. But we also have annual capital projects, things like, I don't know, Laura can talk more about these types of programs. What's that? Like streetlights, sidewalks, water mains, sewer, things we do every year sort of as routine. It's in our CIP every year. The infrastructure itself has a useful life of 20 years, but it's something we do every year on a routine basis and have sort of a schedule for when we replace what and prioritize our infrastructure. And then finally, we can talk about when we issue debt. So we just talked about sort of our current process of doing this reimbursement resolution earlier in the year, allowing us to spend money on projects, and then timing our actual bond issuance with when we need the money, when we ultimately run out of cash or fund balance within the fund to pay our bills. So these are some other things that we can talk about within this part of the plan focused on current outstanding debt. And if you don't mind, I'll go through the full presentation. We can go back through each of the individual components and go through questions that way. I've already talked through the benchmarking peer community data. This was what we talked about a lot last month. So there's a table here for principal debt, total GO bond principal debt, and then we've also this month lumped in our loans as well to show our outstanding debt as a percent of EAV, as a percent of total personal income, and as debt per capita. So one of the things that I believe it was Committee Member Livingston asked last month was what measures we're using and our bond rating agencies, what they look at whenever they look at our current outstanding debt. For most of these communities, these are kind of the 3 measures that come up the most. So debt per capita, percent of total EAV, and percent of total personal income. So we think we've kind of covered the specific benchmarks that we want to cover through a debt management policy with these particular measures.
So in Skokies, I know that includes the bonds that they issued for their public safety pensions.
That is correct.
Right.
So you are correct that if we pull them out, Evanston on this particular chart would be at the top. So I fully transparent that would be the case. It's tough to look at their debt and do all that hard work to kind of pull it out when we know what the ultimate conclusion is going to be is that a big portion of their debt is related to pensions.
So we'd really be number 1.
Yes.
We'd be top in debt. Okay.
When you look at principal and loan, we would be number 1. But that's a good portion of this loan amount is for our IEPA loans, which are largely paid by our wholesale water customers. So when you pull out the loans and you pull out Skokies pension debt, Oak Park still remains above Evanston on many of these measures when you pull out the loans and pull out Skokies pension related debt. But we're still towards the top of both lists. There's no
And just a point of information, I mean, they could have similar loans as well, right? In those places that
Yeah,
could be pulled out.
This is
you know.
pulling out Oak Park's loans too.
Oh, it's
this
pulling
is-
them out. Okay,
This
cool.
is looking at no loans, just outstanding GO bond debt.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Yep. So then the third part is a debt limit. So we looked at all of our comparable communities, and Evanston is the only one with a self-imposed debt limit. Nobody else actually has a debt limit that they impose upon themselves. The state says that home rule communities don't actually have to have a debt limit. And so, like I said, we're the only one of our comps that have chosen to implement a self-imposed one. Now, most of them in their budget, they do talk a lot about their debt as a percent of EAV, because the state's debt requirement is that you have to have outstanding debt that is 8.625% of your EAV or less. So as you can see, all the communities on this list, even if you include, well, yeah, I guess we'll go with the bigger one that's loans, principal, everything. Everybody's below the state minimum for non-home rule communities when you talk about EAV. So when we talk about what we want our debt limit to be, our current debt limit is $155 million. That comes out to about 4.1% of EAV, and that's for tax-supported debt only. If you look at our current tax-supported debt, we're at $133 million, which is about 3.6% of our EAV. If you look at our tax and non-tax supported debt, we're at 4.9% of our EAV. And if you throw in our loans, we're at 6% of our EAV. So if Evanston were subject to the state's debt limit of 8.625%, our debt limit would be $323 million. So I present all this information just to give you an idea of what our debt limit could look like. I kind of leave it to the committee to decide how you want to, as we look at a debt. The pension debt is not included in the state debt limit for home rule communities. That's not part of the calculation for the state.
I mean, we can include it. I know, again, I think what a more valuable number than the percent of EAV, and this is what Skokie reports out always, is what the current debt is per capita. I think that's really much more meaningful in Evanston to have our per capita debt. But our full per capita debt, including our pension debt, I think that's what residents really need to see. So I know Skokie reports out, for example, that its per capita is the last one I'm looking at, and they do have a very extensive debt management plan, and I'll send it to you. The current debt per capita, $3,000, and they stayed in their budget. It's still below the hypothetical limit of, what the state, the 8.625 or whatever it is, the state. If we weren't home rule, what it would be required. So I think that's the number that's more meaningful to residents, is the per capita.
We could have both, though. We could have,
Up to the committee to decide.
we could have per capita and percentage of EAV.
I think there's a lot of merit to why the state rule is based on a percent of total EAV. It's based on the taxable value of property within your community, and most of our debt is repaid through property taxes, which is based on EAV. So I think there's a lot of merit to using EAV, but if there's some measure we can use for debt per capita as well, we can certainly explore that too.
Could we?
Did the state come to the 8.625% number?
Uncertain. I know that's been in place for at least my 12 years of working in local government in the state.
Even well before, yeah. It's been there.
Yeah, so that's where if you're not in home rule, you'd have to have a referendum to exceed that. And
Correct.
that's where I think like Rockford, for example, did away with their home rule because they were exceeding that. So, but I would like to ask that we get a per capita debt, but including, you can do just your go bonds. But I'd also like a debt per capita of our total debt, including our pension liability, including our IEA loans, including our enterprise go bonds, the whole thing. To know what we're.
Two limits, you're saying?
Yeah, I would like the debt per capita as opposed to the EAV. We can have both. We can have the EAV, but I'd like to see the debt per capita. Again, that's the one that has more meaning for residents. Thank you.
And then just as a point of information, because we have debt per capita on here, but if we're going to do that, let's also do that for Skokie. Make sure they do it in the same way, because we're having that issue even with our inclusionary housing ordinance where we can't just pick these things out. If we want to compare ourselves to other cities, we have to make sure we understand everything that they're doing So it's an apples to apples comparison.
Sure.
Because we're not always doing that, and it makes these conversations incredibly
Right.
confusing.
And we're not doing that on this chart either.
Yeah, so we just need to do that moving forward. So I just want to, register that. Thank you.
So if we could get the full debt per capita, that would be great.
Yeah, and like I said too, and Laura brings it up as well, is a question of whether you include your outstanding loans through IEPA as part of your debt per capita number when that debt is ultimately not repaid for by the people in Evanston. So I don't know if it makes sense to have a debt per capita measure, set that limit and say that debt that's not repaid by Evanston residents is part of that calculation. I'm sorry.
I would definitely include it. It's fungible. The people of Evanston are still paying it back. If you didn't have that debt associated with it, it'd be going into other things.
It's directly repaid by wholesale water customers, though. The loans
I
and the
would
repayment schedule are, in our wholesale water communities.
But it would offset costs. I mean, I guess my point is it's all fungible. So
This isn't really. I mean, it's debt that's incurred,
yeah.
incurred with the purpose of having somebody else pay for it. It's not that particular debt is the geo bond debt. I can hear the word fungible and apply it to that because you can use your tax levy, you can use excess reserves, you can use a lot of different things. But when we enter the loans, it's the full purpose is for infrastructure that benefits only our wholesale water customers. So they're the ones that pick up that bill for that. So some of it I agree, but the loan's a little less fungible.
And again, I have to point this out because I know down the road, we're then going to compare ourselves to Skokie and other places. I want to see if they're including similar loans into the way they do it. So because I know it's going to come up and then we're going to be confused because we're including ours. They're not including theirs. Whatever we're going to include, let's make sure that Skokie and whoever else you're going to say is better than us at some point is also doing it in that same way so we can compare apples to apples.
yeah,
I just want to make sure that happens. Thank you.
abated versus not abated.
So this chart does not include with the water and stuff, right?
This one does.
Okay.
This one
This one
doesn't.
does not. Okay.
Yep. So, I am curious to hear anything. I'll get through the rest of the presentation.
Can you
but
go through the rest and then we'll go
Yes.
through each of the points and kind of get a consensus then?
Yeah, so the fourth one is funding future incremental debt service. I mean, this is so important, and we walked through the property tax levy last month and talked about the fact that our debt service levy has gone up 13% in the last 14 years, while inflation has been 35%, which means we're not doing as much work today as we were doing 12 years ago because of that. And you can see, as long as we're only retiring $10 million in debt per year, we're falling behind. We're not doing as much work as we were doing 13 years ago. We know we have huge capital needs that we've historically financed through geo bonds as the primary funding source for this work. We have 15 to 20 million. You just saw the reimbursement resolution with 20 million. And I believe that list has been prioritized down to those key projects necessary to just maintain our infrastructure on that list. Beyond that, you've got our civic center, our public safety building, and other legacy buildings that are coming up. We've got our lead service line and water main replacement. We've talked a lot about what those needs look like and how expensive that's going to be. In other words, the $10 million we used to spend is not enough to maintain our current infrastructure. We've got to increase that amount, and the question becomes, how do we pay for that incremental increase to our debt service to keep up with this? Is it through the property tax levy, new revenues, offloading assets, putting assets to work, reallocation of existing revenues? Obviously, we're always looking for grants wherever possible, and the reallocation of large one-time revenues. So last year, we had the one-time permit revenue from the Northwestern football field project. Those are the types of one-time revenues that would be great to be able to put into a capital program to avoid potential debt issuance in future years. So I think this is a key component of this plan too, is acknowledging that we need to increase the amount that we've spent on capital compared to past years, and providing some general direction on how we pay for that. If it's debt service, how do we fund that debt service moving forward? And so here's the graph that I mentioned earlier. I won't go through it again. like it did last month. But essentially, $10 million in incremental increases to tax-supported debt is about $700,000 in debt service annually. So if we issue 20 instead of 10, it's about $700,000 in new debt service that we have to take on. That's about a 1.24% increase to the property tax levy if we choose to pass that debt and repay it through the property tax levy. The last piece is maintaining current bond ratings. So Evanston's rating, honestly, really stacks up really well compared to a lot of our peers. So I think somebody on the committee last month asked us to pull this data together. So these are just some of the key things that a lot of communities talk about in their debt management plan in order to maintain, improve their bond ratings, maintaining and improving rating to drive lower interest rates, full disclosure and transparency, partnering with a financial advisor when we're issuing debt, which we do, complying with our fund balance policies, which I know we talked about a little bit last month and we'll probably get to again at some point this year, and reducing long-term liabilities. So again, all key pieces to maintaining our current bond ratings. So with that, my presentation's finished. Happy to answer any questions or take in any feedback on, we'll take the feedback and come forward in a couple months, next month or the month after, with a debt management plan for your consideration.
So what I'd like to do is go through each of the 5 points, and then we can get a consensus to give to you to come back to us. So the outstanding debt, I guess that would be the first one. So the question is, which debt do we want to use?
How much is the water-related debt? Enterprise?
The loans that I was referencing.
Well, loans and unabated, or abated go bonds.
Within our, so we have 185 million in outstanding GO principal debt, of which 44 million is in our enterprise funds. Most of that is in water, I think, yeah. Sewer and parking are really small parts of that.
And we don't have any limit on that.
There's not a debt limit in place on our enterprise debt.
Okay, is that something we should potentially consider?
So can we go back to page 7 then? So the question is, we could say, keep the 155 for the GO and then come up with a percent for the overall debt.
I probably would recommend going a percentage on everything.
On everything?
Or a per capita amount or something. This fixed amount and unlocking, unless the fixed amount is something that is based on something. I mean, this was an amount that was set in 2019 without consideration of a lot of stuff. I think if we're talking about a debt management plan, percent of EAV and establishing a measure there, or a debt per capita measure, those are probably better options than some flat locked in amount. So
I'm sorry, I mean the percent. Do we want to do the percent of the GO and loan debt? Do we want to do the percent of the tax supported? So of those 4 amounts, which percent do we want to put in the policy? I mean, which items do we want to do? Just a tax supported debt limit, or do we want to include everything and come up with a percentage of EAV?
So, I mean, I think obviously the highest, we want to be as disciplined as possible, but I am concerned about, because we're paying a huge debt service on our pension liability. And to just keep that always on the side, I guess my question is, what percent right now of our levy is going to service debt? Can you tell me that? Like, what percent of the levy? Is that up there already?
that's our, sorry, I think I only heard part of your question, but I think you asked what percent of our levy is paying for debt
Service.
service.
Yeah.
That is the light blue, the 13.3 million of our.
But including our pension, though, that's debt service too. So
then
we're like at,
the gray,
I think we were like
so I would include
60%
the
last
gray bar. So it'd be, if you want to include it in your, in that measure, it would be 33 million of our property tax levy going towards debt. 20 for pensions plus the 13 for general obligation bonds.
So 20 and 13, 33, and our total is, it's like a 50, how much is our levy? It's, okay, so what percent?
So 33 divided by what?
About 60%, 66%.
So about 66% of our
I
property tax levy is to service debt.
it should be close to that ballpark, 60 to 65%.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was surmising. It seems like a high portion of our levy is going to service debt.
I will say a lot of communities, that's not unheard of. Across our region, public safety pensions are a huge obligation for a lot of communities. And there are some communities whose only levy is for their public safety pension debt. So it's 100% of their levy is for debt service. I know where I was before, it was close to 90% of their levy was for pension debt service only.
And where was that again?
Village of Schaumburg. Yep.
How did they finance everything else then?
It's a huge community, big regional mall, massive sales taxes that we unfortunately don't have access to in the city of Evanston.
Right.
It would make our jobs a lot easier. But
And, okay.
I want to just provide a clarification about when we have IEPA loans or GeoBond, or not GeoBonds, but water rate abated debt at the water plant. So we have a water plant that we operate that serves 11 communities, and we have the water distribution system that only, for the most part, serves Evanston. There's a little bit of a portion of it that doesn't just serve Evanston, but let's just separate those. When we enter into debt to fund a project at the water plant, and we build a big project with an asset that will take longer than 20 years to retire, that debt goes into the water rate that the wholesale customers pay, and they theoretically would pay their fair share of that debt. But because our rate has a risk portion, or which we take many times just as a profitability portion, but it's really meant to mitigate the risk that Evanston is in, we pay much less interest on debt than we get from the wholesale customers to cover it. So an asset that lives 100 years, let's say that asset, when it's distributed out, increases the rates by $1 million. After 20 years, that asset might be totally paid off by the city of Evanston, but the wholesale person continues to pay the cost of that over 100 years. So when we enter into large projects, we actually increase the amount of money that we receive in rates long term. So when we talk about concerns about debt and we want to restrict how much we're entering into at the water plant, there are two things to take into consideration. One, we have a responsibility to provide reliable water treatment regardless of how much that costs us, because we have entered into these commitments. So when we say, oh, we're going to restrict debt to $100 million at the water plant, and we would need to enter into $120 million to provide that reliable service, we are not doing ourselves any favor. We have commitments. But in addition, entering into that debt may result, and doing that project may result in the city making much more money once the initial debt is paid off. So there isn't necessarily a downside as long as the community and the people managing the water plant continue to be responsible about the projects that are entered into. We also review the projects that we're going to do with our wholesale customers, so we're not surprising them with our capital plan. They are pretty well aware of the type of work that we are doing, and they have an opportunity to provide commentary on that. So when we talk about IEP loans, and WIFIA loans is another type of funding we use on our intake project, and doing projects at the water plant, I think we need to be careful about putting a lot of restrictions on. It really doesn't necessarily benefit us in any way. It doesn't improve our financials long term, and it may be reducing our ability to provide safe drinking water. When we talk about the distribution system and only Evanston is paying that debt, that's an entirely different situation. We may need to do it in order to meet regulations such as lead service line regulations or provide long-term reliable service, but that is much more a fair representation of what the Evanston taxpayer is having to carry as a debt burden. That's all. Yes, all water bonds, as far as I know, whether they're IEPA debt issued through our own debt issuance, or if it's WIFIA funded, any share that Evanston pays is actually abated by rates. It is not abated by taxes. Sewer bonds, of which we don't have that many, are also abated by sewer rates, not by taxes. I mean, that's true for parking. I don't know if solid waste fund has debt, but that's how it's generally done.
Of our peer communities, do any of them besides us have a water treatment plant?
Nope. No.
Not even Bloomington?
Bloomington, no.
Okay.
Bloomington might.
Maybe. I don't know.
5 out of 8 of those communities are getting water through the Evanston water treatment plant. So they are not paying debt to do our capital improvements, but they are actually contributing into through their water rates.
How much do we transfer again from water into the general fund?
4 million?
So we transfer 4 million a year.
Okay, so staff's recommendation is to use the percentage of EAV. And right now, it's about 4%, right, with the 155? And you and I talked, we were thinking of maybe, did we say 5 or keep?
5. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
5 gives us the room to grow and to where we need to go based on all the other stuff I shared about some of our capital challenges. But
again, I mean, Lara is right here again for that. I mean, half of the council members here, we know about the future big investment related to the Civic Center, Public Works Safety, that Public Safety Headquarters, and the Service Center. So, yes, we can always change that as and when we need, that thing. But for now, yeah, you can just go with. But keep in mind, it could be imminent. I don't know how imminent it could be, 6 months, 16 months. But that could come into.
You could put in the policy that the percentage is X today, and if it needs to be changed, it needs to be approved by the city council.
I mean, this is our own thing, so
Right.
we can change it at any moment.
So are you guys would everyone be comfortable with 5% of EAV for the tax-supported debt limit? Yeah, that's the first measure. Is there comfortable with that?
and I said yes on this, but I don't know that 5 is the right number to start with, given $100 million Civic Center, $100 million public safety building that may come to a decision at some point within the next year or two. And we'd be talking about this policy again. So
So I think the first important thing is before we set the percentage, what is the definition? Because I was looking at Skokie. Their debt per capita is only based on geo bond. So they don't include pension liability, which they have besides geo debt. They have almost 75 million in pension liability, besides the pension bonds which they issue.
Well, what about the other, because they paid off the liability with the debt. So what
Still,
about,
they have the liability.
right, but what about the other communities? Do you know if they're using GEO?
It's a geo debt where I worked at Carpentersville for 4 years as finance director. We would take the geo debt. And IEPA loan, we are a unique situation and where we are in fact making the money when we take out the loans and money is recovered from our wholesale customers. So it's not appropriate, to include that in our calculation.
I don't know. I'm still on the fence about that one. And sorry if I could speak. Sorry about that. I guess I ask them, do the rate agencies, would they want to consider that, rating agencies, in terms of the IEPA loans?
Yes, I mean, they look at favorably, like we talked about, like when we took this WIFIA loan, which is a federal government loan for our big project, which is going on. And we got it was through Fitch, I think, a AA+ rating. And they were happy to see that, okay, we are going to have a better return.
But I'm saying they consider IEPA loans. They want to know about those loans, the rating agencies.
Not really,
or no?
because it says that, okay, is it all paid by the water fund? No impact on tax levy? And we say yes. All water bonds, sewer, parking bonds are abated.
But I'm saying even that's showing that they're aware of it. We're making them aware of the IEP
Right.
loan. Okay, is my question.
So there are two things working in our favor.
Yeah.
I mean, water, sewer, or enterprise bonds are anyway abated for most places. So that's the first good thing. But second for us is particularly when we issue the IEPA loans and some of the WIFIA loans, which is particularly for that project, we make the kind of money on that,
No, I know. Yeah, no. And then we still have the legal obligation to pay it, right?
Yes.
The wholesale customers do. We're on the line for that.
Correct.
All right.
So are they.
I mean, we have the contract with them, yeah, so they are legally, yeah.
I mean, but with the state has an agreement with us, with the
Yes.
city of Evanston.
Yes.
Okay. And are there ever mismatches between debt payments and customer reimbursements?
No.
You know what I mean?
It never happens because there's every contract, particularly the Morton Grove and others, we did it later on, they have how to calculate the rate, and Lara can go into that.
Okay.
So they pay for those contracts,
And I should be clear. And I'm just talking about timing mismatch. Are we getting when do we get the money? When is the debt owed? That kind of thing. When are the
Yeah,
debt
so
payments
this is
owed?
the typical gap. Yes, like suppose
Yeah.
we are working on this $47 million project. It takes a couple of years. See if it's completed next year, and then I think there's a gap of a year or two, and then we will start charging the wholesale customer.
But we also don't start repaying the debt usually until the project
Next
is
year.
complete, and then the project's capitalized, we fill out the paperwork with the EPA, and then they start issuing us invoices for the debt repayment.
Okay.
But because we have to prove when we get the loan that our rates support repaying the loan, it doesn't necessarily go against us to have more loans because we have documented that the rates will support paying the loan when you consider all of our expenses, et cetera, with the utility.
Another question. Let's say somebody, let's say we no longer, some of our customers decide to work with somebody else. I hope that never happens. I don't think it will. But if that happens,
There are contracts, it's all in place, legal contracts.
no, I mean, but at some point the contract will be up and they leave. Does that change anything? Or do we think we will have already paid off the IPA loans or any other loans, so it's not an issue? But I'm just trying to see if all of that is lined up.
It's theoretically possible, but these contracts we enter into are 20 to 50
Yeah.
year contracts.
No, I know. Yeah.
So
I just feel like all of them
yes.
are a pretty long time.
they are.
And so
yes,
there could be, there could be an opportunity where we no longer have a bunch of contracts. Because I know one contract in particular is like with a bunch of different cities. So I'm just trying to see theoretically, is it possible that one of those could end, but then we still have this, debt obligation?
Let me give you the idea. Like, it's not like that, okay, a month ago they say, yep, we are no longer with you. Like Northwest Water Commission, which uses more than half of our water, their contract expires in 2034. They want to enter into a new contract now.
No, I know.
So it's like 10 years before this thing.
Yeah, we talked about that at the Utilities Commission.
Yeah, but I think
I think the answer to Councilmember
yeah.
Burns' question is it
Yes.
theoretically possible? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it
Is the chance of it happening anywhere, close to reality? No.
But I think for the reasons I've just highlighted, it makes sense to include this as part of that, just for me. And I think we can just say it's reimbursed debt. We can say it's tax supported. We could call it something, but I think it should be included. That's just my take. But thank you.
Councilman Newsman?
I don't think it makes sense to include debt related to at least our water treatment plant and the distribution to wholesale customers. That's not on the backs of Evanston taxpayers. It's not on the backs of Evanston ratepayers. It is unique amongst our peer communities to us. And I think it's going to confuse things if we try and include that because, Councilmember Burns, it's not apples to apples. Like we got other things that make us similar to all of our other communities. Our water treatment plant is a pear and an orange and a watermelon in that basket, and it does not make sense to include it.
Yeah, and I want to be clear
besides that, one more important thing which Lara touched on, suppose there is a requirement, something which we have to spend $10 million to continue this uninterrupted supply to these 11 cities, we'll spend this because we know we'll recover. But again, if the council says, no, you are above your limit, now you cannot spend this 10 million, that would be hard. That's an awkward situation.
And I want to be clear before we move on is that when I say included, I'm just saying it's just something that should be noted in the plan. And again, we can note that who it's repaid by, but I'm just saying if we're just talking about a debt management plan, I think it should be included. And then there's two different things we're doing. There's like, what is the debt management plan that we as a city want? And then it's, how does that compare to other places? And I know that's, it can confuse things, but I think we can easily create the plan that we want, with whatever we feel should be included, which I believe this should be included. We're ultimately obligated for it. It's something that we already make the rating agencies aware, et cetera. But then separately, we should have like something else that is apples to apples, which we can easily pull out the things that aren't included in Skokie and other places. We did that today when we're trying to make those assessments. But then there's the other thing of just what we believe should be included. And so I just want to be clear. I'm just saying, all those other cities aside, if I'm trying to be as transparent as I can with my constituents, I think they would want to, it would make sense to include this.
I guess it really depends on how it's included. Just having our debt management plan reference the fact that we have a ratepayer and wholesale customer abated debt certainly makes sense. But are we going to self-impose a debt limit on that debt? I think that's where I'm saying, no, that doesn't make sense.
I'm not saying that.
Yeah,
I want
we
to
have
be clear.
Committee Member McMillan.
So maybe
had a-
we're not
I
that
think-
far off.
I think
Let's
it's
not
fine.
pretend that debt doesn't exist, but let's not hold ourselves to the same standard with that debt as we are to the debt that everyone else has that we're comparing ourselves to.
Looking at Skokie's, they include the library also as well as the TIF debt. So
TIF is our part. TIF debt is our part of our debt.
that's in there. Well, the library's
And
not
when
though.
we say $185 million debt, I think, which includes the library.
No, I don't think so. When you pull out that thing, it doesn't. Look at,
It's right in this table.
$5
Our
million.
library debt is 5 million of the 185.
what's that?
Our library debt's in this table. It's included in all the measures. It's 5 million of the 185
Can you go back to that chart where it showed it coming
from the
down?
property tax levy.
Yeah.
So that's actually included in the debt service amount. That 13.3 is both city and library debt service.
No, it's not.
Library
Is
is
it?
in the orange.
The library's
In the
orange.
Yeah, 5.6, yeah.
That would be the
But I
library.
can't tell you for sure. I'd have to check. Debt service for the library is only a couple 100,000.
Right.
It might be up here, and this might be the operating levy for the library in this particular graph.
So Clayton, the home rule of 8.625, is that total debt or is that just the tax supported debt?
The state's limit is on total, both tax supported and non-tax supported. Is the
So
state's rule.
would everyone be okay if we did it on total debt, came up with a percentage that you think would be appropriate? Obviously under 8.625.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should include the tax supported, non-tax supported. It's the same as abated and non-abated. I think we should have a total on that altogether, because I think also to Bobby's point, we need to know what our total debt is sitting on our shoulders, however it gets paid. And I'm going to go back to, I know you don't want to say it's fungible, but we transfer money into the general fund.
But the 185 does that include the water or no?
Doesn't include the loans, no.
Right, so,
Pension.
yeah. I mean, we have to come up with something as a starting point, and so it's either going to be just the the current one is 155, right? That's our current debt limit?
Yep.
Or we do the total limit, or we could do both, so.
And if you say you want it to be just tax supported, that's one number. If you want it to be tax and not tax supported, that gets bigger.
Right.
If you want that to include loans, it gets bigger. And then if you want it to include pensions too, that percentage gets bigger as well. So I think we're okay collectively with whatever you want to include in it. I think that we talked about the loans, we talked about pensions. I don't know that they make sense in like our debt limit. It's up to you all, but if you tell us that that's what you want it to include, we would come up with a
So
percentage.
I think one thing I would say that we shouldn't decide necessarily tonight on that we should, because we're going to do this at our next meeting too, right? So, I mean, I would like more time to study this, but I do think we need a reconciliation of total debt. And I do see on other, again, I look at Skokie a lot, I think they do a fine job where they do list out for the residents their total debt. With whether it's IEP loans, including the pensions, everything, and then they give a total number on their budget page. And I think that we should, at least for transparency's sake, have that number. Now, that might not have anything to do with what we set as a limit, but I think that's a good place to start so that we can see all that and know what that is on a per capita basis, and then decide what we really feel, if we were non-home rule, that 8.65 for abated and non-abated GO bonds debt, and look at that. But I think we really need to have some more numbers before us to really understand what we're dealing with.
Councilman Nusma?
Thank you. Let's set a debt limit. Let's go ahead and set something. It's going to be somewhat, arbitrary and self-imposed, meaning future councils can change it if and when they need to. What I want to make sure we do as part of this exercise is talk about funding future incremental debt service. And if all we do is set a debt limit and don't address any of those other points, we're not doing the job here. We're not providing guidance or direction for staff or future councils that it's going to help us meet the needs of the community. So this debt limit discussion is fine. Let's wrap this up and talk about some of this other stuff, which is just as important, if not more so.
Okay, Councilmember, we have the other topics we need to go through, so I think I have a solution, but
Yeah, I guess what I'm confused by is, are we only having the debt management plan conversation in respect to like what our debt limits are going to be? Because I thought we're also just trying to see what are we considering debt, like and that's what I'm responding to right now is what should be included. TIF debt should be included. I believe what we just discussed should be included. The IPA loans
In a plan, not a
in a plan, not a debt limit plan. Decision, but in the plan, do the lease payments get included? For the Civic Center, it's our ongoing obligation. I think that should be included. So that was the conversation I was having, which I have some other ones I would want to see as well. But I want to make sure is that what we're doing right now, or are you looking for some other direction?
I think we're doing that.
Okay.
And also trying to talk about having a debt limit, but I think we can't do that until we address what you're talking about, Councilmember Burns. But I also think we really can't just set this debt limit tonight. I've been asking for like a 10-year cost projection, capital cost projection based on maintenance, based on upgrades, so that we can really see what's funded and what's not funded based on budget, based on what we have out. And I think we really need to see that to have an idea as to where we're going in terms of what we're going to need in terms of a debt limit. I mean, we really need that.
well, actually a policy and setting a limit is, we don't look at a picture today. This is something that's going to live on. So we know the 8.625 is the upper limit.
Well, that's if we weren't home rule. That's only if we're
in the home rule.
if we're not home rule. That's what the limit is.
Right. So I think maybe a little more homework looking at, what total debt, what a percentage would be, what geo debt as a percentage, and then, adding maybe the pension debt or we could have a separate category on the pension debt.
The lease payment should absolutely be.
Well, and if based on what I've heard from the committee so far, hearing Councilmember Burns and some of the things that he talked about including in the plan, but not subjecting to a debt limit, I think we can absolutely talk about pension debt in our plan. We can talk about loans and leases in an outstanding debt plan. But to Councilmember Newsma's point, if we're talking about how to fund incremental additional debt service, otherwise it's just kind of a set of rules.
Yeah.
It's just a rule, an arbitrary rule that says you have to stay under this number and that's what you have to do. It doesn't really provide the city with guidance or planning on what we do. So I agree. We can come back with some ideas on measures we could include just based on the feedback here, setting a debt per capita limit, setting an EAV limit, taking into consideration some of the big projects we know are coming up and telling you what we think a good measure would be. But we do also know that there's huge capital costs coming up. Is it debt? Is it funded some other way? How do we repay it?
And that needs to be in the policy too, because we need those points that you have here, everyone needs to know where it has to come from to fund it.
For the loans, it's easy. We've just talked about it. Wholesale water customers. For everything else, we need some direction.
Okay, so you'll do that. And then also, will there be a section on bond ratings that we don't want our ratings to go below a certain?
Yeah, I think it'll be pretty general and just talk about the things we have to do to keep the ratings we currently have. So.
Okay.
So are we directing staff to kind of take this feedback and prepare a draft for consideration?
I think so.
Sure.
Do you have enough direction to
Put a draft on paper.
at least put a skeleton of a document?
And this gives us time too, because there was a lot of examples in the packet, and this will all give us time to review it for the next meeting. And if you do have suggestions, you can send them to Clayton.
So that was just going to be my point. So if we want certain verbiage in there, should we send that to you or send it to
Send it to Clayton and Hitesh and copy me.
Because I think there are some, both in, I know Wilmette's and in Skokie's, that I think would be great rails.
Right. Again, the purpose of this is to have a policy that live beyond us, give some direction, and, obviously there'll be something in the policy that council can change certain percentages as needed for capital improvements and things like that.
I mean, one of the things that they explicitly say in there is just, things like sidewalks or anything like that, we don't issue debt for. They're very stringent about what they issue debt for. Do we want to do that as well?
And this is I like how you did this here, Clayton, really, that the eligible projects.
Yeah, and if you say don't include sidewalks, then the plan should tell us how we pay for sidewalks then. I mean, honestly, those are the types of things we've been paying for them with bonds, so we could use the direction on what we pay for it, if not bonds. So that's the fourth point, is how to pay for incremental future debt servicing.
Well, but isn't it the other side of the coin? I mean, if we're talking about what debt we can issue, don't we also want to say what it can be issued for?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just saying, if it's something that we're currently issuing debt for, that the plan says we're no longer going to issue debt for, it should provide us with some direction on if we do it and how we do it.
And just a point of
If we
information.
don't finance it, we have to pay cash.
Right, and we don't have the cash to pay.
We have an item coming up, that I think speaks to this. This was one of my referrals. And so I think we're going to get to that later this evening.
So do you have enough direction to go forward?
I think so. Yeah, we should be good.
And thank you for putting all this together and a lot of great information. So thank you. Okay. Lost my agenda. Okay, we're good to D2 zero-based budgeting.
It's just for discussion, so do we need to move
Yeah.
it or still move it?
Yes, just for
All right,
discussion.
so moved for discussion.
Okay, and this is something you wanted to, I know
Yeah.
we had a little presentation from Mr. Kennedy, but if you want to.
Yeah, I just asked him to, this is something that this was something I was kind of committed to doing early on in the term, kind of lost sight of it, and then, thought this was the right time to bring it back. John Kennedy, in talking to him, he had some experience in zero-based, some professional experience in zero-based budgeting. So I, invited him to public comment to talk a little bit about it. Just for the record, I'm not going to read all of this, but I've kind of made put some things in bold in the referral that I made that I'll read off. It won't take long because I'm not going to read all of it. But basically, my referral was to establish a zero-based budgeting program, starting with a pilot in one city department. This initiative aims to identify cost-saving opportunities, improve efficiency, and explore ways to optimize city operations by evaluating all expenses and processes from the ground up rather than relying on incremental adjustments from previous budgets. Under this approach, every program, service, expense, and process would be thoroughly reviewed with an emphasis on identifying cost savings, automation and workflow optimization, eliminating redundancies, and assessing whether current processes achieve their intended results, ensuring resources like personnel, equipment, and materials are allocated in ways that maximize their impact and value to the community, analyzing existing contracts for cost effectiveness and alignment with operational goals, reviewing discretionary spending to uncover opportunities for reductions or reallocation, among other things. And, what this is kind of a direct response to is, I think people from time to time, they bring up, they feel like governments get bloated and that governments could operate more efficiently, more cost effectively. And I'm always looking for a structured process that could deliver to the public the information that they seek, so that we're not having a revolving, rhetorical debate about whether or not we're bloated or not. Like, let's figure it out. And at the end, we'll know a lot more about our government, whether it whatever, whether it reduces or whether we identify cost savings or not, just going through the process, we'll learn more about how things work and how this government is structured. I purposely didn't put in the department that I would want to start with, because obviously I wanted that to be a part of the discussion. But for a lot of different reasons, I really think the Public Works Department is the right place to start. It's like probably our biggest operation, I would imagine. I mean, we got vehicles, we got contracts, we're buying a bunch of materials. They also do, I think they do all the actual kind of work for our Parks and Rec department when they need work on the buildings, et cetera. And so for a lot of different reasons, it just feels like it makes sense to start with the Public Works Department. But happy to discuss it. But I think this is not something that you should do on a regular basis, which is why I don't know when we've done it before. Maybe we've never done it. I haven't done it in a while. And so I'm certainly not prescribing this as something that we should do on a regular basis. But considering where we are right now, financially as a city, and the pension obligations and everything else that we discuss up here, I feel like this is the appropriate time to pilot it. See if we're able to operate more effectively and realize some cost savings, and then decide whether or not we want to kind of expand it beyond the Public Works Department.
We went through it where I work, and it's a great exercise to go through. I think probably reduced about 20%.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if the professional members of this committee have any experience with zero-based budgeting, and did you find it effective? Right. And it's my understanding this is not what you would do every year.
No, a lot of people have done it after COVID because a lot of corporations have engaged in it since COVID because administrations did become larger, and so I think it's become something that's become kind of benchmarking right now.
So is this something you do once every 5 years, once every 10
We've
years?
never done
or
it
just
before.
Do it once and then
This was the first time.
and then see what happens. Because the benefits we're talking about, or the objectives we're talking about, are all
Yeah, McKinsey
noble
came in
and
did it
desirable
for us.
objectives.
Yeah. Why not?
I guess another question is there another way, an alternative approach to achieving these objectives without zero-based budgeting?
Well, I mean, you could do benchmarking and see if you're close, but
Yeah.
And then is this the process that starts like with the department head, and then would it bring in the finance?
Yep.
So you have to bring all these departments together.
as John
Who would lead
mentioned-
the process?
As John mentioned, you typically do use a consultant for it.
It's just
might
for
be
information.
helpful.
We should let at some point the finance department answer some of those questions. 'Cause I did have a conversation with them even before I made this referral, out of respect for our staff, to make sure that it was something that they felt we could do. And so I know they probably have some
Might be
ideas as
helpful
well.
for members of this committee and the public to just define what we mean when we're talking about zero-based budgeting. Like, what does that entail? What does that process look like?
I mean, it would be an extensive effort. And just like what we do is typically here right now, we look at the last year, right? We sit down with the department. We look at the history, okay, line by line item, Parks, Recreation, Public Works, and each department. Here, you forget about everything. No base there. It's zero base. So basically, okay, we sit down with the department. What's your needs in terms of vehicles, in terms of personnel, in terms of equipment and all that? So it's kind of a quite extensive effort. At one point,
Have you been through it before?
No, what we have done here is in 2012, I think we did, and I think you would know, priority-based budgeting, and which is kind of more popular sometimes in the municipal sector, where we don't go by the department and their needs for budget, but we go with the community priorities. And that's what we did. We came up with like a 50 or 100 different items, services, and asked the community, which are the top 10, which are the bottom 10, where you don't care if we, And I think that gave us some directions to the city council too, that, okay, what the people feel in this town. So I think a couple of other towns that now I don't remember, they did the same thing, priority-based budgeting instead of zero-based budgeting, What are the community's immediate needs, urgent needs? They think that these are critical for our thing. So again, yes, we could do that. It is a comprehensive effort. And again, as I think Councilmember Burns said, that we start as a pilot base with one department. The only thing we thought that, again, Parks and Recreation, because there have been so many business units, like almost 40 plus business units, right? And a lot of turnover in last 10 years, a lot of restructuring in that department has happened too. So we just kind of trying to fix the problem there, kind of somebody leaves, okay, let's hire we need these services. So if we are doing it, in my case, again, I thought that it might be good to start with the Parks and Recreation, look at those 40 business units, whether we can put it in some other format, while we're doing it, restructure, realign the needs and whatnot.
Yeah, I don't think this committee necessarily has the perspective to make a recommendation on which department to do this exercise on. But before we get to that point, let's convince ourselves, and I'm maybe not quite there, that we even want to do this to begin with. I think this exercise would make a lot of sense if there was a puffy and bloated operational budget, which I don't necessarily think is the case here, but maybe you don't know until you look.
That's where what it comes into picture, I think Committee Member McMillan said, the metrics, right? And that's what we are doing everywhere. The debt, some of the other things, where we are, right? We are comparing the metrics. So we get the idea that are we loaded and no, something wrong here. Let's look at it. But
if we look at how our non-salary expenses have increased over the last few years, it's been negligible.
Well, less than 1%, I think.
And so I don't at first glance see where there's a lot of fat to cut. But maybe that's the point of this
But we don't know till we know.
Is to look closer. So, I'm keeping an open mind.
I think just one quick point on that. Looking at Public Works specifically, 90% of their operating budget is personnel-related expenses, insurance, salaries, benefits, seasonal employees. So Mr. Kennedy's point earlier was how few soldiers can you have to get the job done? This exercise cannot not look at 90% of the budget. It can't just look at the 10%. So, we'd be talking about a process that could be perceived as pretty challenging for departments. If we're talking about how few soldiers can you use to get the job done, if that's fewer than you have on salary payroll right now to do the job. And what that transition plan looks like, I'm sure that was part of the puzzle there.
Well, that's how we would save money is by eliminating positions.
And again,
it's sort of like, where's the pain point, and you can always add back.
Yeah. And again, 90% for one, but overall our expense, like general fund, 80% is the salary and benefits,
And I just want to say, because we're having kind of a free flow discussion, but you can also do it through attrition. And so I don't want us to get scared off. This city is going to be around, to your earlier point, longer than us. And so even if we plan to make changes now that may not go into effect until people retire, it still makes sense for the city. So we can't look at this from, our lifetimes. Like, we have to plan ahead. And if we do that, I think eventually we can start to reduce, the operating, costs of government, which is what I think we're being asked to do pretty consistently. If we're being honest. So this is like, again, this is the way to actually see what's there, right? Other than that, we don't know, so we're either going to investigate it or continue to not have an intelligent response when people question whether or not, there are some cuts and efficiencies that can be made.
But Councilmember Burns, couple of things like which Councilmember Newsma said, what is our goal here? And if the goal is that, okay, are we doing the right job? Are we comparable? Then are the metrics enough? Like, okay, we compare with our 7, 8 communities and whether we are, like in some of we pick 10, important criteria, metrics and say where we are. Are we right in the ballpark or no? We are way off. Then let's look at something, because we are not doing the right things.
Councilman Kelly?
Thank you. Yeah, and I just want to say it's really about how we go about this. Having been a teacher for 32 years and been on negotiating teams, I think it can be a really great opportunity for all staff involvement to really look at what's needed. I think we're short on actual boots on the ground. I think, and so, and I think that's where you have folks participating, from the unions getting involved and saying, what do you think could be cut that wouldn't impact or the ability to, for example, maintain our parks? And you have everybody involved looking at that to really identify what areas. I mean, we've hired a lot of people that aren't boots on the ground too, right? So, meanwhile, we're short of boots on the ground for sure in greenways and other departments. So I think it can be a really healthy sort of team building process if it's done right and led right, where we get that feedback from the folks who are boots on the ground, delivering the services, getting the recycling, asking them to really look at it. What do you think could be put, and they might get it right, they might get it wrong, but that input is so important. The folks who are delivering the services, the public goods. And so I think if it's done right, it can be really wonderful, and it can give everybody a chance to participate and feel like they're having a voice in the shaping and improvement of our city, and putting money in more, allocating it more appropriately so that we deliver the services that residents need and deserve.
I've seen that kind of thing happen through a different process back in my former manufacturing career. Lean Six Sigma, lean black belt, lean green belt kind of process evaluation, which is one of the points here, automation and workflow optimization. So there are ways to do exactly what Councilmember Kelly is suggesting outside of a zero-based budgeting process, which we could do anyway. One question about zero-based budgeting, and picking up on something that Member McMillan said, is this: if we were to do this, we would need to retain an outside consultant to kind of lead us through the process. How much would that cost?
That I don't know, but we can certainly figure that out.
I just want to add to that. I think it's important to do it, and part of the reason why is because even some of this discussion is making me uncomfortable. I think we're too close to it, right? Like, we have some unions even that, and I'm not getting political, but I have to say this because I think it'll support why I think we have to have some outside support who are determining whether or not who to endorse in campaigns, who are also representing staff in this building. And I'm not saying I'm not questioning whether or not they have a right to do that at all. I don't even think about it as much. But in the context of this discussion, stuff like that matters, right? And so I think we need to remove ourselves from the process, allow somebody else to put an eye on these things, to provide us recommendations. Obviously, we'll have the final say, but it won't work if this is not done right. And by picking and choosing different things that, we did something like this, I'm saying we need to do all of it. Every single last thing on this list, and maybe even more, we need to do for one department starting off, or it's not worth it, to really understand if there's an opportunity to cut costs, to operate more efficiently. And if we don't do it, if we're not all in, it's not going to work. And if we don't do it in a department that has all these things, again, the reason why I said public works, a lot of contracts, a lot of bids, a lot of materials at the person, a lot of staff, a lot of vehicles. There's a lot there. And so I think it'll give us the best opportunity to be successful, but also it'll give us a best understanding of whether or not we want to continue to do this in other departments. And if we only do it in public works, I'd probably be fine with that, right? Because I think some of the other departments we may be able to get at in other ways that has been discussed up here.
And I just want to, I'll give it, and Committee Member McMillan, we've been in banking for a long time. And sometimes when you just start with a clean slate, you kind of look at job, if HR is one of our biggest expenses, you look at job descriptions. We went from functional lines to regional lines as an example in banking. So there may be other ways of flowing management, flowing employees, benefits, all those things tie in. And I strongly believe that if we test it with one department, and maybe public works is too big of a department because consulting fees may be large, and that's something for city council to look at. But I would try to, before a decision is made, what is the cost benefit of a consultant? But the zero-based budget, again, we call it different things, reorganizations. But when HR is tying you down and employees, and again, it may be attrition, there's technology, things may be done much better. Maybe there doesn't need to be, I have little stuffy notes here, little face-to-face contact. There may be things that are done more, like the banks, used to have 30 tellers there. Now you have 2 because everyone's doing it through ATM. So if we haven't done this in a long time, I think it's worth a shot. So.
Yeah, and I agree. I think partially what Councilmember Newsma said and what Councilmember Burns said. I don't know that it has to be exactly zero-based. I think that we could go to a full zero-based budgeting, but I also think there is somewhere in between. But my main point is that, like, and I will speak as a teacher, like, we would look at, and I would look at and make a big point that to really understand what could be cut that wouldn't impact the teaching learning environment. And I think that's where I just want to make sure, however we go forward, and I agree, I think there should be a buffer between the political, the electeds and this process, the same way with the comprehensive plan, frankly, there should be consultants also, but, so I agree with that, but I just want to make that point that however we go forward, that we make sure that that does happen, because frequently you'll get administration, you'll get the top, the desk people running the show, making these decisions. And it's so, so important that those boots on the ground are really there weighing in, giving their input as to what they feel is really necessary to deliver that product, that they're there in the front line delivering. And however we do this, I would ask that we make that a priority. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Yeah, this was just supposed to be discussion, but if we want to make
this is a real referral that I made that I planned. I wanted us to take action on this. I want us to do this. I think it's the right thing to do. Right time. I talked to Bill Stafford about this, not to put him, the old basketball coach, but also the former CFO here. He thought it was a great idea. I talked about this with him early on in the campaign. Again, I don't care what we call it. Sometimes I think because people have favorite kind of buzzwords that sometimes zero base may be like, that's why I hate names sometimes. Let's just, let's define the work, that we want them to do and get it done. And as long as it's thorough enough, which is all I care about, I don't care what you call it, then that's what I'm looking for. I want it to be thorough.
What if we just said that we want to take one department and optimize the efficiency of that department and not label it?
Well, I don't want to.
Let's not argue about names.
Okay.
Yeah. I think for now we move it forward as it is, but I'm just saying that's more for council members. I don't want you to get caught up in.
Yeah, I just didn't want to scare anyone away with that.
It's more I'm interested in the work.
What I'm getting is a consensus from this committee, and I'm giving weight to the professional members of this committee who seem to think this is a good idea, that it makes sense to pick a department and apply this methodology to that department.
Right.
Is it, are we suggesting we do that in time for the next budget cycle?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, we have time.
We should start it.
We have to start like now.
Yeah, we should start it as quickly as we can. Yeah, which is why, because I've never obviously implemented this before. I was thinking the first time, I was like, let's do all the departments. And then we're talking to John, he was like, nah, I've actually done this. You want to start off, so I was like, okay, makes sense to me. So whatever the best way is to do this, we should do it that way, but we should start as soon as there's support for it. And it sounds like there's support.
So the recommendation of this council, if I could offer the following suggestion, would be to direct staff, which would mean our finance department and the city manager kind of collectively to decide what department it would make sense to do this exercise on. Investigate retaining a consultant and then report back to this committee. Does that go straight to council?
Whatever y'all think.
I like your idea of just using the one because it's got a lot of people, and that's public works, and that's where.
I would like that registered on the record is what people think, what department, at least individually, you think. I'm not saying it's not, we want to hear from staff too, but I want to hear from.
Honestly, I don't think this committee has the visibility into the departmental level stuff that would allow us to make an.
Well, because even what I heard earlier, it seemed like it was more employee based, right? And so I'm not just interested in that. I'm interested in the whole thing, right? So I can't, if that's how staff is going to approach this, then I don't agree with how they're approaching it. I'm approaching it differently. I'm trying to look at which department has a lot of stuff to dig into, right? That's what I'm looking at. And I don't know any other department that has more than public works.
Just to be clear, I didn't say that because it's 90%, we shouldn't touch that department. When you look at Parks and Rec, so Public Works, 90% of their budget is personnel. Yeah. In Parks and Rec, I think it's closer to like 65, 70. So I think from our perspective, there may be more to find looking at a department like that, where we've had conversations at this committee about how profitable or how break even do we want our locations to be? Where are we okay losing money at some of our locations? This location's losing a lot of money. These are the only ones that gain money. It's sort of, I think that's where we're coming from with the interest in doing.
And my
parks
response
recreation.
wasn't to yours. It was something Tess said about, it just seemed like when you talked about parks, you were focused on like changes in personnel or something like, it seemed like it was personnel focused. And I just want to be clear. I'm interested, whether it's parks or public works, I just want to look at everything. Yes, personnel, but also everything else that they do.
Public Works is probably well worth analyzing, but it might be the most complex department to do this, to start off this exercise on. Yeah.
I think our job is to recommend that we want council, and it's a pilot. We're picking one department, and I would rely on staff to where they think we can get the biggest bang for our buck with this pilot to see if we want to continue it with other departments.
And I'm glad you said that, because that's what I'm concerned about. Because I've seen this in other ways where we do a department, there's nothing there, and we're like, oh, this doesn't make sense. Right. And then I look the fool. I'm not a fool. I'm saying I think it's gold in public works, right? That's what I'm placing my bet on. And if we went there and we found something, then I know it's much more likely that we'll do this again. So that's why I'm concerned about where we look. Let's look where we think there's something there.
And I think that's a council decision, not
for sure.
Definitely.
And it is
City
the
Bank
council,
sort of-
but again, I would echo what you said. Like in public works, and again, I don't have, it's a big department, as you said, so many vehicles, people, not just, but the thing is, some of the functions are essential, like snow removal, trees, sidewalks, curb. Can we do that? Versus in the parks recreation, and again, we feel that, okay, you are looking for some efficiencies here. Why we are doing it and trying to find in parks and recreation, there could be a 30 cost centers or units. Okay, is this worth? Does this activity generate enough? Like an enterprise base, Is it making the money, or are we just losing? And then the second aspect could be more like a social, that, okay, no, but the community needs this service. So that's why we thought we talked about it when first Councilmember said, I'm like, which department would be the right fit? And particularly the changes we have seen in that department in last 10 years, And we thought, that might be too many business units. Okay, are we making enough money in golf? Are we making in tennis? How the parks? Each cost center. And we can evaluate each cost center and then come up with the results, and council, they have the final decision what to do. So that's how we see the versus in public works. We might find something that, you are spending $500,000 million here, but okay, can we stop snow or tree removal or snow removal or all other operations which could be like essential part of the.
And I'm sorry, but it's just not that simple. There's things that I don't want to say here because then it sets off a whole nother thing with unions and stuff. So I'm trying to, but it's not that simple. Like there's more to this, and so.
What Citibank is sort of famously going through this right now. And, what they've found is, they had a bloat at the middle management level. And by eliminating that, even their processes became so much more efficient. So it wasn't even just the personnel costs.
Well, I don't think we're going to decide today which department, but I do think I'd like to make a motion that we recommend that this go to council. Staff comes to council with ideas of which department, and then council can decide if they want to go forward with it, and if they do, which department. Because I don't even think we have enough information to fully decide on that today. So is that a motion? I make a motion that this goes to city council with staff's recommendation on which department, and that we move forward. And if staff could get some kind of estimate of consultant fees too.
Yeah. So let's get a second to that.
Second.
So again, just to reiterate, motion to advance this item to council with staff recommending which department to consider for the pilot, along with potential preliminary costs if we were to, for a consultant. Again, some sort of an estimate. Okay.
And I guess as a friendly amendment, it would be nice to just if you could break down, because it sounds like we're at least, in agreement that it's either Parks and Rec or Public Works. So it'd be nice to have you give us kind of a comparison of both, to try to make your argument of why you think Parks and Rec, but also try to make an argument for Public Works.
Process improvement to be done in community development.
Yeah, if you want to throw that in there, I thought it seems like we were narrowing in on Parks and Rec, it would not be nice to have information about both at council is really what I'm saying.
But I guess I'd also like some representation beyond just sort of our directors and feelings about this. I mean, I would say I'd like to reach out to unions and hear where like tap into the unions and ask them also where they think what should be looked at, because these are the, besides just the folks at the top,
Well, we're just doing a pilot. We want to get started with that. And I think
we
the
want to be
consultants
effective. But I
will,
think what Bobby said is we want to make sure that that this is an effective process, that we're not spinning our wheels, and that we end up with some really excellent efficiencies that improve our city. And I think what Leslie said about, maybe there's some, management levels. So I just think it's important that
They'll have to be a part of this. And I'll give you an example, because I've talked to our union rep about parts of this already, is with pay kiosks. We have a pay kiosk at Robert Crown right now. I was the one that advocated for that. And again, I'm not going to go into it, but I think there's a way through attrition, if we expanded those type of opportunities in the community, that we could operate more cost effectively as a city. Before I did that, we had conversations with the union. I work with Luke on that, as well as other conversations. So they're in the loop about some of the referrals that I'm making, and they absolutely should be a part of this. Will be a part of it, but they are familiar with that. I'm interested in exploring these things with them, though. And so they'll be a part of it. That's yeah. I think it's our job to decide as a council.
Yeah.
What we think is a priority and what's important. But what I'll say is we absolutely need their participation. We need to work with them. We need to partner with our unions, et cetera, and our staff. I mean, everything you said, I agree with.
Right. No, and I agree with
boots
you.
on the ground, all that. They need to be a part
I
of
think we
it.
got the
It's up to
motions.
us.
I think
But I mean,
think we're good to go.
I'm a little
One thing
concerned
I would
about.
suggest real quick, I mean, when you were talking about, and it looks like a little bit more lengthy, so I would rather just first investigate, have a consultant, and they can look at it, that, okay, whether parks on, I think that might be better. If it's just staff investigating, we would rather have a look at the consultant cost.
That's a great point, too.
And then
That's an
they
excellent point.
come up with this thing that, okay, this is the best department to move forward.
I like that.
yeah, I think our goal is just to give direction so that that we have a consensus and agree with the zero budgeting concept. The details will be filled out by the staff and city council. So we have a second.
Yeah, there's a second.
Yeah, taking roll. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Taking roll on that. Councilmember Kelly. Aye. Committee Member McMillan. Aye. Councilmember Wynn.
Aye.
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Chair Rikus.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Passed 6-0.
Okay, we are running out of time. We had one other,
And we talked, I'm
referral.
okay to table this.
Yeah, we're going to table this
yeah.
for next month. They're going to come back with more details on the debt management. We're going to look at our first draft of 2024 budget versus actual. And that was on my agenda for the pension presidents to just give us an update on the financials of the pension plans. So we will have a full agenda. If there's anything else anyone wants, let me know. But I think we have a really robust full agenda for next month.
So we'll have an actual budget for 24 at our next one? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, budget versus
Preliminary.
actual, right?
We will
Yes.
have the
Preliminary.
actual, okay.
Preliminary, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, draft. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we've gotten a lot done tonight, and we will keep
Thank you.
moving forward. Thanks.